that's what you are as a leader. You're a pastor, right? So if people are not being pastored by you, if they're not getting better by being under your leadership, you're using them. Like they're just doing tasks for you and they're accomplishing your job for you. And that's not very healthy.
Well, welcome back to the Church Circle podcast. One of the things we really wanted to do on this podcast this season is broaden our horizons and chat a little bit more about the inner workings of church, not just in a creative perspective, but across the board, whether that be giving and outreach and ministry, or if that is volunteering. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. And so when I was thinking about who would be a great person to talk about volunteering, I remember someone brought out a book a few years ago called The Volunteer Effect. And that person was Jonathan Malm, all the way over in Texas. And thank you so much for joining us. He agreed to join us, and we're so glad to have you here. So how are you doing, Jonathan?
Doing good. It's a beautiful day. Happy life. Can't complain.
There you go. Yeah. So Jonathan will explain a little bit more about his background in a second, but you guys may have seen him before on Instagram. He makes some funny memes over there, some church-based memes. If you want something you can relate to, go and check that out. And has also has a history of producing cool companies that do great things for churches. So he'll explain that in a second. But this is the first time me and Jonathan have actually jumped onto a live call. We've only emailed before, but we've known each other through Instagram for a few years now. But it's great to just get to know him a little bit more as well. So thanks again, Jonathan, for joining, and maybe just help people set the scene. Kind of, they may have seen you on Instagram, but they may not know kind of what your background is and kind of what's brought you to this point. So if you don't mind just sharing a few details about that.
Yeah. So I grew up, I'm from Texas originally, but my dad was, the first thing I can remember was my dad was a pastor of a small church in rural Texas. So small town, small church. One day there was, I guess, a deer outside that got hit by a car, and 10 guys jumped out of the service and ran out to go get the deer and pack it up for meat. It's very, and obviously my camo makes me seem very Texas. I'm using this more ironically. I'm not a huge hunter or anything, but it's, I grew up in that. And then we moved to Guatemala, for 6 years as missionaries. And while we were there, my dad started a missions agency, which brought us back to the US, and it's still running. It's like this massive organization called Commission to Every Nation, around the world, tons of missionaries that they're serving. But yeah, and then I got to work with my dad while he was pastoring a church while running the mission. And that's sort of where I started learning about ministry. As a pastor's kid, you always do everything from leading worship to designing a website to cleaning to doing sound, everything. So that's what I got to do. And as the church grew and grew and grew, I got to do more and more cool things, also specialize a little bit more, but work with a lot of volunteers. Part of what we were doing with me being on staff is I wanted to modernize the church to not euthanize. That's not the word. To youthize.
Yeah.
To make it younger. And the church had been built. The church was 50 years old. It had been built. The building had been built in the 70s. So it looked a very certain way, but was not reflective of what we were doing in the church. So stage design was something that I was doing. I started this website sort of as a personal research project, and that church stage design ideas just kind of got really big, and it's still going today. I don't run it anymore, but it's still going strong today. And then I also run Sunday Social, which some of you guys might know. We create social media graphics for churches, just kind of a library. You can use whatever you want for your church. And then writing books. So I have a co-writer, Jason Young. We really enjoy each other, and we keep writing books together about volunteers, about welcoming experiences, about avoiding burnout, leadership. So lots of stuff that we like to talk about.
Yeah. And I don't know if you know the impact you've had on churches across the globe, but even just for me in my own church that I used to work for, or a church that I volunteer in, I've seen the outworkings of what you've established. So whether they use Sunday Social for some of their graphics, or whether it's looking up stage design ideas. I remember being in plenty of meetings in the church I used to work for, and we'd pull up the website and go through all the different stage design ideas that we could come up with, and a lot of them were palette designs. That was that era, the good old palette designs. But it was one of those things of there was I knew there was someone behind the scenes running it, but it's actually so great to kind of get to know that person. So if you didn't know that, if you have downloaded Sunday social templates, or you've, got a stage design, why don't you just let Jonathan know? Because I think it's always good to kind of know the person behind it. And this is what Church Circle is really about. It's getting to know people that are doing great things in ministry. And maybe you haven't seen them face to face before, but these are the people that are doing cool stuff. So Jonathan, thank you again for joining, and thank you for what you're doing and sticking at it. I'm sure there's been some hard times, but you've made the church a better place. So thank you so much. And
thank you.
So when it comes to volunteering, and we could talk about lots of things. We could talk about being an Instagram celebrity at this point, and we could talk about running a church-focused company. But I think we really wanted to dive into volunteering because it sounds like you've got a lot of experience from one, just growing up in a church as a pastor's kid and getting understanding for all the different roles and the hats to wear, but also working with your co-writer as well, and then just establishing these books, and one of them being The Volunteer Effects, which talks heavily about fostering a positive volunteer culture. And that's kind of what we want to dive into today. So when we talk about fostering a positive volunteer culture, what does volunteer culture actually mean in a church context, and why is it important for a church to have a strong volunteer culture?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the healthiest perspective on volunteerism is you think of church like a family. Whenever you get together for a family meal, Thanksgiving here, Christmas, Easter, I don't know what the UK does as much. Thanksgiving's a very American holiday, but you get together and you have the family all over and you prepare a meal, and maybe I chip in setting the table, or my sister chips in, cooking mashed potatoes, or my brother does whatever he's doing, right? We all chip in to create the family gathering. And there are some guests who come in. I invite a friend who maybe doesn't have anywhere to be this Thanksgiving, and I invite him over, and he doesn't really have to do anything. He can chip in if he wants, but it's kind of like we're going to treat him specially. We're going to make a special place for him to feel welcome, and a place for him to relax and feel like he's at home, right? So that's really what volunteerism is all about. It's what it should be about, right? It's a family gathering together, and we're all chipping in. And yes, there will be some people who they're in a season of life right now, or they have to take care of the baby, or they're so they can't maybe chip in to volunteer, right? Like, it's not like you're not part of the family if you don't volunteer, but
yeah,
that's the hope behind it. Is it's not just us creating this cool program with unpaid volunteers. It's rather a family meeting, and we're just creating space for people.
Yeah, I love that analogy because it's so scalable. It can apply to the smallest church or the largest church, and it can apply to a church in whatever season they're in, whether it's just starting out, or whether they're a church that's been established for 50 or 100 years. And it's not just an analogy that applies to just that one specific thing, but you can start to think about that in terms of, okay, when new people arrive, like you said, okay, how are they treated? Are they expected to put in the same amount of effort, or volunteer the same, or serve the same as someone that's been there for years? And I think when you start to think about it in the context of a family, it's very easy to understand. You don't have to have all these processes and procedures and just to get the culture across. It's just family and being together, and that is reflected in the way that we serve each other. So no, it's a great analogy, and it helps me to kind of understand, because I've worked with volunteers before, and I've run volunteer teams, but nothing on a scale that that we're looking at today. And it's very helpful to just kind of take a step back, think about that perspective, and move forward from coming at it as, okay, this is a family. Families are messy, but we all pitch in, and this is how we develop that from there. So we've talked about that, and one of the things I kind of want to dive into is evaluating volunteer health, evaluating church health. And this is, part of this conversation over the next 20 minutes, and then kind of finding some strategies to outwork that. And maybe hopefully by the end of this, have some tips to improve volunteer culture in whatever church is listening to this. So how can church leaders evaluate the health of their current volunteer culture?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of ways. I think the first way is probably to evaluate what happens when a volunteer has to say no. Are they afraid to say no because maybe you give that face that's like disappointed, or maybe you text them to ask if they can serve one Sunday and they say, sorry, I won't be able to. And then you ghost them for like a day, just kind of, I've had that happen so many times where they just don't respond. You're mad. So obviously I'm not a volunteer. It's not a volunteer position if you're going to get mad at me if I have to say no, right? So what happens when someone says no? Do you talk badly about them to other volunteers because they had to take a month off because they were going on this massive European trip or Cancun trip or something, right? Can a volunteer say no? If not, that probably indicates that you're seeing them more as tools to be used by the organization and less as family members, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of it. And then part of it is are they excited? Are they growing? Are they getting better in their faith? Are you seeing more fruit of the Spirit? Are they becoming more loving, more joyful, more kind, more patient? Are you seeing that? Because that shows that you're actually pastoring people, right? Like volunteerism shouldn't be about them doing your job for you. You are a pastor if you're leading people, right? Like a pastor is just, the example of a pastor is a shepherd, right? Like pasture, right? That's what the word comes from. It's a shepherd, right? It's someone who leads sheep to healthy places, cares for them, keeps them healthy, helps them grow, keeps them away from danger. That's what you are as a leader. You're a pastor, right? Yeah. So if people are not being pastored by you, if they're not getting better by being under your leadership, you're using them. Like they're just doing tasks for you and they're accomplishing your job for you. And it's not very healthy.
Yeah, it's a delegation versus discipleship thing, right? Like I think quite often we talk about discipleship at the beginning of the funnel. So it's like, come and join this team. It's great for your family. It's great to get involved in church, and this is going to change your life and transform your life, and it's going to be on a path to discipleship. And then 2 or 3 weeks in, it's very much, okay, can you go and stack these chairs here, or can you go and do that? And obviously there is an element of serving in that capacity and those practical, pragmatic things. But I think when we take a step back and actually look at what the church is achieving, volunteering is a huge part of the discipleship program, for bringing people into the church, finding a place and a community for them, and then them learning and outworking how to live like Christ, one through the church, but then out of that as well. And volunteering plays such a huge part of that. So it's one of those we have to kind of really zoom out and look at that and think, okay, as a person listening, including myself, is this something that I've been guilty of in the past? Is this something that I do? What are some common signs? Let's say I lead a team. What are some common signs that maybe I am not having a very good volunteer culture? You talked about like the leader not having very good culture and maybe not accepting their no. But what about from a volunteer perspective? What would an idea of not being a very good culture leader be?
You mean if I was a volunteer, how would I know if the culture was bad? Or are you saying that how would I be able to help the culture get better as a volunteer?
So if you were a leader and you're trying to identify in, like, let's say you're doing some, like from this podcast, you're doing some self-analysis. What are some key identifiers that you can see within your volunteer team that are showing that there's maybe some not good symptoms there?
Yeah, I think, when people hide stuff, I mean, this is true of all teams of employees as well. But if people hide something from you, that usually it shows that things don't feel safe. Are they, when they fail, do they hide it from you? Or are they able to fail and able to grow through failure? Another thing is if volunteers just kind of like block themselves off for a large period of time, that's sort of an indicator that maybe they're afraid to say no, and they just are, instead of being able to communicate with you because they're afraid of your response, they're just blocking themselves off on planning center. Are people competitive? Are they competing with each other and putting each other down because one person feels like they have so much more to offer and they don't feel like they're getting the attention they deserve? Yeah, there's a lot of things that I think we can identify. I think the solution, though, is to, again, go back to thinking of yourself as a pastor. And then I think also just seeing, there's this trap that you get into, and this is like my number one recommendation. Anytime someone starts a job in ministry, there's a trap that you get into of just surviving Sunday. Sunday comes with horrible regularity. And because you're getting paid to make Sunday happen, there's a tendency to, I have to make every Sunday perfect. Every Sunday has to have all the volunteers. Every Sunday has to look exactly like the Sunday before. And you're just surviving. You're creating duct tape solutions for Sunday. Mm-hmm. And so you're looking at the planning center roster and you see the gaps. You don't see the people that are, maybe this person's going through marital issues, or this person's just started school, or this person is just struggling with their faith. And you don't really care about that because all you care about is making sure that roster is filled.
Yeah.
And you see them as cogs in the wheel. But instead, what if you started thinking of, okay, this Sunday, might fail. It might not go very well. But can I make decisions right now that are going to help us a year from now? So one of the things I always tell people who are starting to work at a job is don't think about every Sunday. Think about, what can my ministry look like a year from now? What can I do now to make my ministry healthy a year from now? And you're going to have some bad Sundays, and that's okay, because the goal isn't surviving each Sunday and just being relentless with it, but the goal is to actually help and grow and become healthy in leadership and ministry. And that's one of the best things you can do.
Are you ready to take your church leadership to the next level? Then it's time to join Church Circle, a vibrant community where church leaders, staff, and creatives come together to share ideas, tackle challenges, and grow in their ministries. Say goodbye to getting lost in the noise of endless social media groups, and hello to a space where your voice is valued and your struggles are met with unwavering support and inspiration. Church Circle is more than just another online community. It's a place where you can connect with like-minded individuals who truly understand the unique challenges of church leadership. Ready to experience the difference? Head to churchcircle.com and sign up today. Yeah, it's the duct tape analogy is great, because I've been there where you rock up late on a Sunday morning. This is me, guilty of this, and there's a gap missing, and you just try and fill the gap however you can, and then something goes wrong, and it's very much a survival mode. There's a lot of anxiety around managing a Sunday, and I think a lot of people lead. And would you say this is a problem with modern church, how they coordinate volunteers, or is this just something that's always been?
Yeah, again, going back to that family analogy, there should be excellence. If I'm cooking a meal for my family, I want it to be amazing. I want everyone to be like, oh my gosh, that roast or whatever was just exquisite, right? I want to give my best, right? So there is an element of excellence, right? I want to give excellence because I love my family and I want them to be impressed, right? But there becomes this pursuit of excellence where, we're afraid we're going to lose our job if everything is not excellent. Or there's the standard. I think there's, we've kind of had this idea like the church should be the most creative force in the world, right? And so we're thinking, well, then the church needs to be like Hollywood. The church needs to put on a show. The church needs to, have an amazing concert every Sunday, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I'm saying we have put this pressure on ourselves we have to be excellent. And it's a devastating pressure, and it takes the family part out of it, and it creates, consumer culture where we have to make everyone happy. We have to make everyone happy, and it'll cripple you. It'll crush you.
Yeah, one of the things we've talked about in this podcast before, particularly in the creative perspective, is the excellence versus efficiency conversation, where I think a lot of creatives, and it sounds like a lot of people in general in the church world, just focus so much on excellence that it almost paralyzes them to make decisions and do things effectively. When we talk about excellence, sometimes it's just excellence in the creativity, but there's also excellence in efficiency, right? Like if we can have our systems down and have our approach and our leadership style and whatever it may be, if we're planned and organized, then there is excellence in efficiency. And sometimes they kind of at a point with each other, but they actually do work it hand in hand. And something I think we're so focused on the end result, on how Sunday looks, that we forget of like how Sunday runs. And that's,
well, and there's a tendency for the church to pendulum swing, right? Where we go from I grew up in a church that was like, it was very much a family. So we would have a couch on the stage, and it was very much like, we'd have ficus trees, and it was very much like, let's be family. And it went to the negative of nothing matters because we're all family. So we phone it in. We don't give our best. We don't clean the place. We don't, it was very much like, we're all family. And then it swings to this other side of like, let's learn from businesses. Let's learn leadership techniques. Let's learn from the business world to make the church the best thing it can be. And we swing to this opposite extreme where we almost get into this. I don't know if you've seen those shows about Uber or about, these startups or like WeWork, where it's like, it has this really unhealthy startup culture.
Yeah.
We're like, we have to rule the world. And that toxicity has infiltrated the church a lot, because we've swung to this other extreme. And I'm hoping right now we're seeing a swing back to the other. I would love to somehow be in the middle where we can learn from leadership and can be a family and still, get the best of both worlds. But it's human nature. It's a pendulum swing.
Sure. It feels like COVID got us right to that end of the pendulum swing of that like sort of seeker.
Yeah, it snapped us back real fast.
And then we kind of just went, oh, we need to be somewhere else. Like we can't. And I think
we need community.
Yeah, seriously. And I think
COVID showed us that the most important part about Sunday morning was not what happened on the planning center run through.
Yeah.
Like that Sunday morning service is the least important part because like we can get that on YouTube, right? Like I can tune into Stephen Furtick and get an amazing message, amazing worship, or if you don't like Stephen Furtick, whatever pastor you want to put in there, right? But I can't get the community. I can't hug my neighbor. I can't talk to someone. I can't get prayer. You know, I mean, you can get prayer, but you know, it's the community aspect that's missing.
Yeah, and if that feels like, I think you're right. I think it feels like we're heading somewhere in the middle now where the volunteer and the person is seen. And I think maybe the person was only seen as a number, you know, just before COVID, that 2019. That's not for all churches, obviously, but I think in general, as we...
Well, and we always said every number represents a soul, right? So we find these cute little ways to spiritualize it. And I mean, I think there's some people who legitimately have that heart for it, but like, it's really easy to like, every number is a soul. So we got to make sure we have 1,000 of them, you know? Like
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is why I love your Instagram page, because you take these little ideas and if people don't know about your Instagram page, we'll do a plug at the end, but you should definitely go and follow him. He does these funny reels and memes, and a lot of it is about volunteer culture. A lot of it is about working in a church, or just funny things like that. And those are the kind of things that you pick up on, and it's just funny. So go and check it out if you want to just breathe a little bit and be lighthearted about working in a church. Just take a moment to relax and laugh about it. Then definitely check out his Instagram page. What is the handle? Is it at Jonathan Malm?
Yeah, just at Jonathan Malm.
Yeah, there you go. Easy. Well, I want to pivot the conversation slightly away from managing volunteers and more towards recruiting volunteers, because I think once you get people through the doors, quite often it's quite easy to tweak your style to make sure that they either fit in the right spot, or they're well looked after. You have conversation. You can kind of build that once they're in, but there is this kind of bottleneck almost of getting them through the door in the first place. So, what are some effective strategies? And I think you talked about this before. Your Volunteer Effect book talks a lot about effective strategies for recruiting volunteers, and then how do you match them to the right roles? I think it's quite often the creative roles or the worship roles are quite easy to fill and people want to be in them. But what about the other roles that maybe are a little bit less desirable, should we say? Maybe they're a little bit harder to fill. So how do you go about recruiting people for those roles?
Yeah, we talk about this for maybe 6 or 7 chapters in the Volunteer Effect. But the idea is that you need to invite them to a mission, not to a role. So one of the things, we need someone to help park cars in the parking lot, right? I approach someone and say, hey, would you help direct traffic in the parking lot? And some people will say yes, right? But honestly, I have no desire living in Texas to stand outside in 100-degree weather to help park cars, right? That's not a compelling thing for me.
Sure.
If you were to instead say, hey, we have people coming on to our campus every Sunday, and we want there to be a smiling face to help ease their anxiety, to ease tension, ease stress, help them find a spot. Yeah, but more just to be welcoming and to show that we're actually excited that they're here. Would you be willing to do that? That's much more compelling, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would totally love to do that. Same thing with kids. Do I want to wipe booties all day when I have my own kid at home that I barely want to wipe theirs, right? Do I want to do that? Of course not. But do I want to instead be an adult that can be an example for them, that can help take great care of their kids so their parents can fully focus on the service? Do I want to be a part of that? Yeah, that's much more compelling. So invite people to a mission, not to a role. We so often focus on the tasks that they're accomplishing instead of the big picture of what's really happening whenever they're in their place, right? Invite them to that. Second of all, invite people personally. Oh, and what I wanted to say about that when I was starting is just make sure that you're not doing this manipulatively. Because you can very much, same thing, every soul is every number is a soul, right? We get to do this, like we said, right? It can be very manipulative, but you need to truly understand what the purpose of that volunteer position is and really sell it like that. You need to fully believe it. You can't just be something to manipulate people to get in. Second of all, invite people personally. One of the least effective things you can do is say, hey, from stage, we need volunteers for the kids ministry. You might get one person if you ask from the stage for volunteers, an open call. it's the observer effect. We assume someone else is going to do something about it whenever we invite people, when we invite the group. But instead, find people who model the aptitude or model the values or behavior of your ministry. So kids ministry, they're people who like to have fun. They're okay with a little bit of chaos. They talk well to kids. They kind of get down on the level. They're not, stern. They're not, they're kind of fun, right? Ask those people, and then you can even call it out, say, hey, I've noticed these things about you, these aptitudes, these values that I think would make you amazing in kids ministry. Would you be willing to volunteer? Or parking lot team, dude, you're always just like bubbly. You kind of like to dance. You can be killer in our parking lot team. Whenever you can call out specific behaviors and show that there's a great place for those behaviors, that's going to be much more effective. So you invite 10 people personally, and you probably get 5-6 people to volunteer versus announcing from the stage, and if you're lucky, you get one. So invite people personally, invite them to a mission, not to a role. There's a few other things there, but those are probably the biggest concepts I think that a lot of people just fail to do.
Yeah, it seems like it all goes back to authenticity. I know, especially in this like modern, I sound so old saying this, but in this modern social media world, we've moved away from
modern world.
This Instagram thing. We've moved so far away from this polished thing, right? Like it used to be, that to make a successful video on social media, it had to be this polished thing. And now it's, professionally filmed, lighting, all of that. And now it's moved so far to just like the things that are just filmed on an iPhone with natural light are the ones that do much better. It's all about just getting a quick snapshot into someone's real life. And I think the two things you mentioned all actually come back to authenticity. One thing is we're not going to shy away from being honest about the role. We need to sell people on the mission because the mission is true. But what happens when we try and make the volunteer role or position cool or attractive is that we kind of try and plaster over and cover up the realness of the role. Like we all have to be honest. Like no one wants to stick their hands in dirty dishwater, right? Like no one wants to wipe the mashed potato off out of the pan. But it's part of the being with the family, eating dinner, and that end result. And so it's the same with church. Is that when you come up to church, there's going to be things you not necessarily not want to do, but it's part of the thing. And we have to be, if we shy away and try and hide that, I think that's when people get into the role with false expectations. I think it's the best thing ever. 2 weeks in, they're like, I didn't expect this. This wasn't what I was told I was going to do, and I'm out. And that just is the constant cycle of just people leaving. Whereas what you're saying is
that's a huge problem. Well, I mean, that's a huge problem I would say with kids ministry is so much in our churches. The two ways of getting deep, in a big church, we try to make the big church small. So the two ways you do that is either small groups, which a lot of people don't want to do, or volunteerism. And most churches prioritize volunteerism over small groups. So you say, you want to find your people, you want to get your tribe, then you need to volunteer for kids ministry, right? And then you get to kids ministry and there's two other people in there. One of them's a teenager who doesn't talk. The other one is an older lady who thinks she knows how to take care of the babies the best. And there's just screaming babies everywhere. And you're changing one, you're giving a bottle to another, and it's just hectic. You didn't connect with a single person. So we sometimes sell volunteerism as a form of community, but we need to be careful. If community is not happening there, then you cannot sell it that way. And I think a lot of volunteers have been burned that way, because it is, kids is tough, man. Every church struggles with kids ministry. There's not a single church that I've seen that's like, yeah, we got this. We're rocking it, right? Every church struggles with that. But the good ones, at least, find a way to create community that isn't during that Sunday morning go time where because community is such an important part about volunteering. And if it's not happening, it's a bad thing.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said as well about, that second point of inviting people personally. And I think this is another thing that maybe churches have shied away from is the response is that everyone has a responsibility to push the church forward, right? Like we have this Vision Sunday and we have this platform vision where it's like, this is where the church is going. And like you said, it's the observer mentality where it's like, oh, someone else is going to help do this. But as soon as you get, that your group of people, your sphere of influence, and you get them alongside you and you say, hey, I think, like you said, like pulling out those personal qualities and saying, I think you'll be really good at this. Will you come and serve alongside me? It's kind of like, okay, it's a call to arms and we're all going to kind of stand together and push this forward. And that personal responsibility then outworks itself. you then have people who got invited in are now inviting other people in because they have a different friendship group. They're going to bring it in. And that's real community, right? That's not this false community that we've kind of made up to get people through the door.
Yeah.
We've got this culture that started to kind of just do its own thing and develop and grow just out of people saying, hey, this is a responsibility for me to get people involved. This has been great for me personally. I know this would be great for you. And these are the reasons why, and come and join us. And there's no pretending about it. It's authentic. And I think people are looking for that these days. I have one last question for you. We're nearly at time, but I think we've kind of talked about some things that people can implement, but what about how can we measure the success of, let's say we've implemented a lot of these ideas you've talked about. What's the best way to measure the success of volunteer programs or volunteer culture? Like, how do we know we're doing a good job?
Yeah, I mean, there's the measuring the results that it is to a volunteer. You can tell your volunteer team, hey, we're looking for smiles. We're looking for shoulders relaxing, right? Like, these are the things we can tell our teams to help, to give them a goal. But as far as how do we know we're leading our teams effectively, is like you said, if people are inviting people to join their team, say, hey man, you should join the parking lot team. It's a lot of fun. We welcome people. If you get people recruiting for your team on their own, you've seen success, because that means people are having great experiences, right? Like, that is the number one way that you can tell it's going well. But second of all, and I mentioned this, alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that you should be seeing the fruit of the Spirit grow. There are some volunteer teams that bond over a mutual enemy. So like the classic example is worship team and tech team. Mm-hmm. And the tech team, while it's a very tight-knit group, the tech team can be very snarky and very mean. Yeah. That doesn't mean that even though it's a tight-knit group and they're serving faithfully, it doesn't mean that it's a healthy, volunteer team. So the same thing with worship team. Worship team can be some of the meanest ones to the tech team, right? So see that they're growing in love, they're growing in patience and kindness and all of their Spirit. But another thing, and this is one of the things that I love to see, is whenever you see people feel like what they're learning at church applies to their regular life. So, I mean, the perfect example of this is Chick-fil-A, right? Like, if you've ever gone to Chick-fil-A, when you say thank you, they say my pleasure, right? Mm-hmm. It's funny though, you can tell people that used to work at Chick-fil-A because they still say my pleasure. Like, I always call it out. I'm like, you used to work at Chick-fil-A. And they're like, yeah, how'd you know? Because you said my pleasure, right? It bleeds into their everyday life, right? So when you see what's happening in your volunteer team bleeding into their work, into their friendships, into other areas of their life, that shows that you're really creating a culture of growth. That's a really good thing. So, you might not see that, but you might hear stories of it. These little stories, these little anecdotes that you'll hear will be signs that, wow, this is a very healthy team we've created. And I love seeing that.
I think maybe we've underplayed the role of the Holy Spirit and just what God can do through a team. I think quite often it's all planning center, it's all run sheets, and it's very, like I said before, pragmatic, and it's very to the point, and this is how it's going to be, and we're in control. And I think we talk about some anxiety sometimes, and it's because we have to take that step of faith to say, like, hey, God, this is what I've done to the best of my ability. Now, can you finish the job? Can you help me to make this something that's holy and righteous and excellent? And that's the only time you're going to see it step forward to a point you want it to be, is when God meets you in the gaps, because we can only take it so far. And if we will have control of everything, it won't meet its full potential. And I think using the fruits of the Spirit is an excellent guide and an excellent measuring stick, because it's biblical. Yeah. We know exactly what we should be looking for. And it's pretty easy to see that in other people as well. That person doesn't speak so, badly about that person anymore, or that person goes the extra mile, or that person's really patient now, or just, that kind of thing, where you start to see it outwork visibly. So I think that's a great thing. I was expecting you to say like a metric or, some way of documenting it. But actually what you've said is, like, you just need to go back to basics, understand what the Bible says about this kind of stuff, and use the Bible and use the Word of God as a measuring stick, and say, is this where we think we should be? And if we're not, then there's some work to do. But I think that's great. Do you have any kind of final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the thing that will let you do this is by, there's a temptation to delegate all of your role to, I'm getting paid as a leader, and I'm going to make all my volunteers do my job for me. Really, the best thing a leader at church can do is to equip their people. Your job as a worship leader is not to lead worship. Your job as an executive pastor is not to park cars or to welcome people in through the doors or any of that stuff. Your job is to equip people. So what we do is when we can fully get all of our tasks onto our volunteers, ideally what that frees us up to is to be a support, to be an encourager, to be a pastor, and to just be able to walk around. I remember I was running the tech team at my church, and I was the person who did everything. And a big change that I made was starting to delegate and trust my team and train my team to take care of it without me. And what that freed me up to do is I could walk around the campus. I could go to the kids ministry and I could encourage them. I could check to make sure they had everything they needed. I could actually support people and make a better experience for everyone because I wasn't so busy with tasks. I was busy leading people. And I think so often we get into that survival mode of duct tape solutions. We have to make Sunday happen. So I'm going to run sound even though I shouldn't be running sound, or I'm going to do the photography even though I shouldn't be doing the photography. And we get so busy doing tasks that we can't lead people. We can't pastor people. We can't empower and protect people while they're volunteering. And so there is this balance. We're not trying to just get other people to do our work for us, but rather we're changing our perspective on what our work is so that we can make a great experience for people.
Yeah, I think it's not about releasing, to create more free time for yourself, but it's about releasing so that you can empower other people, and therefore you can give yourself the capacity to then lead those empowered people. So, mate, these are great thoughts.
Serve them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that just, again, that starts the snowball effect, right? People see service in action, they want to replicate that, and then it replicates and replicates and replicates. So these are, and that's what you call the volunteer effect.
Aha!
There you go. Even the cover has the linking chains. I recognize that design.
Yeah.
So there you go. Well, Jonathan, I want to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for imparting your wisdom as well. If people want to know more about volunteering or just want to connect with you or find out more about what you do, what are some great ways for people to connect with you and just find out a little bit more about what you're up to these days?
Yeah, Instagram is everything for me. So that's where I love to connect to people. Every Sunday I do an Ask Me a Question, and we have lots of fun with different questions people ask. Not always just church related, but find me on Instagram. And then, grab my books. You can grab The Volunteer Effect on Amazon, Audible. It's other places as well. The Comeback Effect. This is the hospitality one. And then most recently, Don't Burn Out, Burn Bright. It is basically how you can thrive in leadership and stay away from burnout. It's not just about making sure you play golf on Saturdays. It's actually about you can actually be a high capacity leader who doesn't burn out. So that's the goal of that book. But grab those 3 books and then connect with me on social media.
I am going to do that. I'm going to read those books as a chat. I turn 27 tomorrow. So they go you guys don't know when this was recorded, so I won't say. But that's the goal for the year is to make myself a better leader, but also make myself just a better person in general. So I'm going to read those books. And also, I'm going to respond to your Sunday stories with some wacky questions and see if you respond.
Oh, do it. All right.
You guys know, do the same thing. And Jonathan, thank you so much again for joining. And we'll be back again for another episode very shortly of Church Circle Season 2. So thank you.